Hey there, happy Thursday. Today's March 18th. Today's national day is National Sloppy Joe Day. Today's lesson is looking at Hong Kong and Japan. Basically looking at those two regions and what they did in post World War II, basically during the Cold War, of modernizing their economies and becoming democratic during this time. And we have a couple of Canvas assignments. One is on Hong Kong, and we'll just go ahead and go to that real quick here. And so it's called Hong Kong, Blend of East and West. And if you notice, Hong Kong is on a southern region of Japan, basically right in this waterway. And Hong Kong has had a very interesting history with China and with Britain. And as I say here, Hong Kong has a rich and interesting history, especially during the Cold War and currently right now. Hong Kong wants to be its own independent, democratic, capitalist country, independent of China's communist government. And China wants to keep as much control on Hong Kong as possible due to Hong Kong's rich industry. And the video below will discuss basically the the conflict that Hong Kong has had over the years with China, and especially now in the news, there's a lot going on with China wanting to have more control with Hong Kong, and even Hong Kong is starting to do some protests over wanting to keep their government the way it is and not be controlled by communist China. And so down below, click here to watch the short video, and then afterwards, there's three questions related to the video, and be sure to review the questions before you watch the video. And then the other assignment I wanted to share with you is related to Japan. Japan is also part of our standards for learning about different regions and countries during the Cold War period, and it seems like we talk about Japan and World War II. Japan has to surrender. We talk about the atomic bombs, but what about afterwards? What about afterwards with Japan? Before I go into this, just want to share something with you with Toyota. We all know the Toyota dealership. Everybody seems like they want a Toyota pickup truck. The Toyota Motor Company was founded in Japan in 1933, but Japan had to suspend its operations until the end of World War II. They had a war to fight, had some countries to invade, but by the 1950s, however, Japan was becoming an industrial powerhouse. There's that word again. Toyota, like many other Japanese manufacturers, was back in business, baby. This image taken by an American photographer, Margaret Bourke-White, in 1952, shows laborers at the Toyota factory here. And so Japan has most definitely industrialized and has become one of the leading industrial nations in the world. And let's take a look at where this modernization kind of started. And then after this, go ahead and do the quiz questions below. So first off, the background to this. And so the contemporary discussions about modernization typically involve two widespread developments, industrial capitalism and representative democracy. These developments, for most part, came over the course of a few hundred years. Many countries influenced one another on their paths to what we now consider modernization. Japan was no different, though its particular path was heavily affected by military threats from other nations. It, in turn, became a military force of its own. See, it had to. Japan had to. It was heavily affected by these military threats. And what are they going to do? And so, in turn, they became a military force of their own. And while undergoing a very a high period of rapid growth into the 20th century. Now, Japan's modernization efforts date back all the way to the 1800s. So in the previous 250 years, Japan had been isolated from the rest of the world. It was ruled by the Tokugawa Bakufu military authority, who sat at the top of the elaborate feudal hierarchy. Feudal system, if you remember, right, it refers to, you have this hierarchy of a caste system. And at the top, and then it goes from the top down. And so a military authority sat at the top of this feudal hierarchy. Most foreigners were either strictly controlled or banned from visiting altogether. So Japan tried to just keep foreigners out of their country. But still, Japan maintained a sophisticated society with high literacy rate. By the early 1800s, foreign sailors began visiting Japan. Western powers like America and Britain, they used what was called gunboat diplomacy. Okay, gunboat diplomacy. So diplomacy is like working things out, right? You go to a country, you work things out. And in gunboat diplomacy is like, sending your military in and doing it that way. So gunboat diplomacy is a bit more threatening type of diplomacy. Basically, it means the threat of naval war. Basically, this gunboat diplomacy basically forced Japan to kind of open up its ports and basically become more industrialized from that point on. And so it was kind of like Japan was kind of like forced to kind of become modernized and open up its trade with America and Britain because of this gunboat diplomacy. At the end of seclusion brought Japan to kind of a crossroads. Some felt the Japanese should maintain their isolationism and just drive out the foreigners, while others saw that stance as impossible and undesirable. So in 1868, a faction of samurai, or basically Japanese feudal lords, seized control of the government in the name of a 16-year-old Meiji emperor. 16. He's like emperor of Japan. The event was known as the Meiji Restoration. So basically, after a little brief civil war, Japan embarked on a crash course in modernization. They wanted to modernize, but they wanted to do it their own way. So diplomats and scholars were sent around the world to learn the ways of the West, and Westerners were invited to Japan, directed by the government. So Japan industrialized and built an elaborate bureaucratic and at least partly democratic system. Government officials became convinced that their country would only truly be independent if it possessed enough military strength to deter Western empires. So Japan fought a war against China in 1894, 1895, thus kind of the attitude that, we can win, we can do this, and won decisively, by the way. And additionally, they took control of Korea. The Japanese also shocked many countries, maybe the world, by defeating Russia in 1905. In just a few decades, Japan had achieved its goal of becoming a military and colonial powerhouse in East Asia. So the Japanese government continued to push for military strength, ultimately put it on a collision course with the United States. And we know the story after that. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, and then you get into World War II, and then after 1945, after the U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs, and the USSR declared a separate war of its own, Japanese forces surrendered. So in the years that followed, Japan fully embraced a more parliamentary based political system, basically having representatives um, and um, and becoming a high value ally to the Western countries, to the United States. So today, Japan is a highly developed country with a rich array of electric goods and automobile makers that export products around the globe. And Japan's GDP, which is their gross domestic product, is the third largest in the world. So, what do you think? How can modernization transform a country? And then some things to think about is one, why did Japan emphasize military strength? What impact did it have on Asia and the world? And two, modernization in the 1800s meant democracy and industrialization. What qualities do countries today have that make them modern? What does it mean to be modern? If you're a country in the world today and you're modern, what do you think are the qualities of that? Explain your answer. And then go ahead and then submit this assignment. And then tomorrow in class, we're going to go ahead and talk about the country research, mini research project tomorrow during Zoom. So go ahead and use the rest of the period to finish up your assignments and be nice to the sub. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. And I'll reach out to me if you have any questions. And I'll leave with this cool background. Hong Kong is right behind me. So I'm going to go hang out in Hong Kong. All right. I'll see you guys later.